Welcome to Parenting on Purpose, a podcast where we discuss parenting topics to help you raise your children intentionally so that they find their unique purpose, place, and contribution to the world. My guests will be sharing childhood stories that have impacted their adult life to help us understand why parenting on purpose is so important. I will also answer your questions on how to raise children to be successful inside and outside the classroom. I'm your host, Abiera Bolu. I've been a teacher for over 15 years, teaching children as young as 4 all the way to age 18. I believe that a successful life is a life lived on purpose for a purpose. Hello, we've got Wendy Weinberger here, the CEO of Illuminos LLC. It's an academic coaching and tutoring company that you co-founded with your cousin, Wendy Weinberger. I love what you're doing with children. Tell our listeners more about why it's so unique and so fascinating.
First of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Congratulations on all the success. It's amazing. Such a wonderful topic. Sure, I'll start by telling you a little bit about how our academic coaching program is different than traditional tutoring. So there's, tutoring companies, especially now, I think are a dime a dozen. And when you think of tutoring, you think of a little bit of extra help in math or in science. And listen, right now, there are learning gaps and that kind of help is needed. And there's, there are too many, and then all of a sudden there's not enough of us. But I think what really makes academic coaching unique is we are addressing those foundational skills that help students learn how to learn, as opposed to a Band-Aid, in my opinion, that, if a student is struggling in math, as a parent, you might think that sure, they must be, if they have a poor grade in math, they must be struggling with the concepts in math. But if you zoom in a little bit, that's not always the story. In fact, most often that's not the story. If you look at their grades, maybe they have really high grades on everything they're turning in, but a lot of things just aren't getting turned in. And then even within that, sometimes things aren't getting done because we're forgetful. Sometimes they are getting done, but they're being left at home. Sometimes they're getting done, they're being brought back to school, but they are still in the binder at the end of the day when you come home the next day. And so they're not getting to the teacher. Those are not math problems. Those are foundational skill problems or executive functions, skill problems. So those are issues more with organization or with planning. We're not good at every subject. That's okay. Tutoring companies should not be forcing children to be good at every subject. Our brains are not wired that way. It's okay to have strengths and weaknesses.
Yes.
The job of really good academic support, and it's my belief and why I start academic coaching, is to really help kids understand their own strengths and weaknesses, and then be able to know, hey, I need to start 3 days earlier for this, while my sister, my brother, or my friend in the class can do it the night before. I can't. I know myself, and that's one of my weaknesses. So academic coaching, our focus is really on those foundational executive function skills that help students thrive, not just this year in school, but as they matriculate next year in school, the year after that, then high school and college, perhaps graduate school, and then of course, in real life, in a world where it's hard to see the relevance of some of the things that we're learning in the classroom.
Of course, yeah.
In real life every day, working people report using less than 10% of what they learn in school in real life every day. But we all send our kids to school and we spend a quarter to a third of our lives in school. Why is that? Why do we do that? There must be some purpose. And it's not because learning about ancient Chinese pottery is really, really important to selling real estate or, or commanding a classroom. It's because the skills that we learn along the way that I just think as a society, we may not do a good enough job talking about those skills directly. But it's these organizational skills, time management skills, prioritizing, problem solving, self-advocating skills, et cetera. And so that's exactly the program that we developed. We have a proprietary, research-driven, just amazing program targeting those executive function skills, helping kids learn how to learn.
I think that is so crucial and something I talk about a lot with parents. You know, I run a tuition company myself, but very much so. When I have parents come to me asking for maths tuition or English tuition, sometimes I say to them, that's not what your child needs. I love how you described it. Sometimes it's just a band-aid. It's about the skills behind the math skill. So the executive function, as you talk about problem solving, focus, just being able to sit, focus, pay attention for long enough to get something. So academic coaching is crucial. Sometimes I find that it's the parents that actually need to understand the importance so they can push it more with the children. So how do you find speaking to parents in your work?
So I think parents have trouble, myself included, parents have troubles watching their kids fail, right? Yeah. They have trouble watching their kids fall a little bit short or have an experience that, that's uncomfortable. And so as a parent, that's very difficult, to watch. And so if, student, young Bradley comes home, right? A student comes home and has a big math test the next day and didn't look ahead or know about it until the day before and has no idea what's going on, missed 2 days of school, et cetera. As a parent, you see your kid struggling. They're in the middle of the pool and they're flapping they're struggling. And so as a parent, what do? You hire a tutor and you pay them whatever they want. And you hire a tutor to come and teach, cram the material, stay up really late at night and then get up in the morning and then go. And what happens? The student does okay on the assessment, right? So in some ways it worked. And that is also bad because that means that the parents think that was an okay solution, that was the right solution. But what happens is they find themselves in the same place 2 days later, 3 days later, and then twice the next week. And so what the conversation that really should be happening is, I know it's hard, but parents should be letting their students struggle a little bit, swim in that struggle a little bit, and then have a conversation after. Did that feel good? Did that not feel good? Do you think maybe you should start earlier? And let me help you. I have some ideas, right? And that's more of a coaching mentality as opposed to a tutoring mentality. But it's hard. It really is. It is hard. I promise. It's hard. As a parent, our kids we get up in the morning, thinking about our children. We go to sleep at night thinking about our children, and we want nothing but only smiles. And so it's really hard to accept that. But I think you're onto something. That is absolutely correct, what you're saying.
So it's so true. But I always say to parents as well that, because of what you're saying, how hard it is, but how extremely important it is, it's important that we start early. So I just want to ask you, I would say, if parents start to think about this earlier, what can they do in their children's lives? And then they have companies like yours that will support them. But if they start these things earlier, then you are helping them race ahead, rather than leaving it to the last minute and then jump into tuition. So what would you say to parents? What can they do to start their children building these character traits early on?
So just to be clear, I do a lot of public speaking, and I truly hope every lecture that I do, every workshop that I do, every speech that I offer or give, I truly hope that everybody in the audience, whether it's educators, whether it's parents, I've done things on television. I want everybody in the audience to be able to take the things that I speak about and then implement them successfully on their own and never have an occasion to need us or call us. But the reality is, there are always going to be that subset that want a little bit of extra guidance or have some issues with, kind of the execution on the back end. And then, listen, as kids grow up, they have mouths on them and they become teenagers, it becomes kind of harder to play that role. So I really hope all of your listeners can take something from today, hopefully a few things, and implement them tonight and do so with success. I think that's wonderful. So the question you're asking is fantastic. And gosh, I have so many, so many ideas. So I think positive and negative reinforcement. Okay, let's talk about that for a minute. So positive and negative reinforcement systems. Positive reinforcement is encouraging those behaviors that, encouraging kids to repeat those behaviors that you want, that you desire. And negative reinforcement are things that you do to discourage certain behaviors from happening in the future. Having healthy positive and negative reinforcement systems from very early on in the home, I think is really, really, really important. Kids, the brain develops from the back to the front. Yes. Okay. Yeah. And the back, the front is performance and the back is knowledge, right? And so things like ADHD and a lot of other learning differences, those are performance problems in the front. And this front part of the brain, in charge of executive decision making, executive functions, etc., is not fully developed. I don't want to admit it outside of this podcast. So, but if for girls, it's a little bit sooner. Okay. For girls, it's, mid to late 20s. For boys, it's late 20s to, gosh, I joke and say early 70s, but it's really early 30s. Okay. But you want to get women in the audience clapping. That's how you do it. And so I think that if you think about how the brain develops, kids are responsible for some of the poor decisions that they make, but not entirely responsible. And they rely on us as parents for guidance and for initiating structure. So to that end, I think that having healthy positive and negative reinforcement systems to help students or kids, children feel good about the things they should feel good about, and to second guess themselves on those things that, that should not be repeated, those kinds of behaviors that should not be repeated. I think that is really helpful, and guidance counselors at school can help start that process. And there's certainly some preventative work with from a therapeutic angle to help new parents or parents that feel like the way that they grew up, might not have been ideal. And so that was kind of your only experience. And if you want to provide your kids with a different experience, there's a therapeutic angle, certainly. So I think that's one thing. Another thing is, I think, an emphasis on effort. So if a student brings home a grade that's really poor and a parent gets really angry, it's very easy for a parent to focus on the grade itself. But honestly, that's the least important. The grade is just a predictor or an indicator. What a parent really means is, Joey, I know you really well. And I know that you have incredible potential because I've seen it. And I don't feel that this is reflective of your best effort. And what we really want to focus on is effort. That's what we mean. Even if we don't do a good job of saying that, what we mean is this isn't your best effort. So as a parent, if Joey's best effort, all we want is for our kids to put forth their best effort. And if their best effort was, a 75% on an exam, that's okay. That's totally fine. And I think most parents would agree that they feel that way if it's truly their child's best effort. And so we need to watch our language, is what I'm trying to say, is really have a focus on effort. And I think that's so important, and it fosters something. We could do a whole nother segment on this, but it's a growth mindset versus fixed mindset. Absolutely. When children are born, they're 100% growth mindset. They are welcoming challenges. They are fearless. There's no such thing as embarrassment. They don't even know what that is, right? But then once you get older, you start to fear, maybe I won't be good at that. Maybe. And so we switch from our mindset, from this growth mindset to a fixed mindset, to the point when by the time we're in middle school, it's like flipped. And we are mostly a fixed mindset unless we proactively make ourselves, kind of different. And when I say make ourselves different, I mean, with the help of our parents, that a growth mindset has been nurtured. And so therefore they maintain that growth mindset and are not fearful of things that are difficult. And so that's another thing, to do. Another thing I think parents can do is habits and routines are so critical. We are creatures of habit. And I think habits and routines are so critical. So not every day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, not every day needs to look the same, but there should be a flow to the week. Mondays and Wednesdays perhaps look the same, and Tuesdays and Thursdays, the flow of those days look the same, and maybe every Friday is different than all the other days, but every Friday is the same. And
Yeah.
then the weekend, and we are just creatures of habit. Parents come to me all the time and say, my kid's really forgetful. What do I do? And I said, well, listen, that's how God made us. We're forgetful. We are the way we are forgetful. And if you battle forgetfulness, you're never going to win. And so what you have to do is you go around it. There is a solution to forgetfulness, but you can't attack it directly. You have to go around it by creating some systems and habits and routines that don't give us the ability, even the chance, the opportunity to forget. And so I joke and I tell, parents, when was the last time your kid called you from second period or third period cat class or a few hours into school and said, you know what, Mom, I forgot to put pants on today. It doesn't happen, right? There are certain things, even the most forgetful people, if you make something enough of a habit, like a deep ingrained habit, that even the most forgetful people won't forget it. And so I think that having a certain flow to the week and building those habits, having lists around the house, here are the 7 things you do before you go to bed. Here are the 4 things you do when you get up in the morning. Here are the 2 things you do every time you get to class. And, so I think that's important, is having structure, routines, and habits. And then not unrelated to that, the last thing I'd say, not unrelated to that, is I think having an organized approach for your children to see. So modeling what you want in your children. So modeling is still, research tells us that modeling is still one of the most powerful ways of learning transfer, right? So, I oftentimes parents will, hire us to come, and most of the work we do is in the home. I feel like that's the right way to do this kind of coaching. Basketball coaches coach on a basketball court. That makes a lot of sense. But so when it comes to academic coaching, if we're not in the classroom, which they have support in the classroom, where are they doing their academics? They're studying and managing distractions and trying to stay focused and be organized and prioritize at home. And so we most often come to the home, but we certainly can do a lot of what we do still, virtually, especially in this new kind of paradigm and environment. But, we traditionally, the way it started was we did a lot of work, in the home. And I think that the modeling is so important. We come into the home a lot and we look at a kid's desk and you can't see it. And there's piles of things everywhere, and you can't find a pencil, even though it's a desk and that's where they do homework. You can't even find a pencil, but then I ask the parent, they always are surprised, and I don't know why, but I ask the parent, can I see your desk? And so we go to their office, and their office has piles of work and books, and I said, listen, how can you expect different things from your children? You got to practice what you preach, right? If there's a rule for no electronics at the dinner table, then don't bring your phone to the dinner table, right? And so I think that's another tip for parents. And I'm sure there's more, but that's off the top of my head, and I think more will come out as we keep talking.
Yeah, no, I'm sure parents have taken so much from this already. I mean, first of all, understanding the importance of coaching. And I always say to parents, one of our main jobs is coaching our kids. We have to take on that role, because that's what the children need. And a big part of that is modeling. Thank you so much. It's so interesting to listen to you. I want to hear now how you got into this area of academic coaching. So there's always a story, a journey behind it. And I'd love you to share that with the listeners.
Sure. I'd love to say I went to sleep one day, I woke up and I had this amazing idea, and but no, there was a story, and it came from my own struggles. Honestly, I struggled in school, but I was very lucky and didn't realize how lucky I really was until much later in life. But I was very lucky. I'm the oldest of 3. I have 2 younger sisters that are 5 and 6 years younger than myself. And my father was a pretty well-known clinical psychologist, specialized in working with adolescents and kids. And a lot of the struggles that I had, ADHD, diagnosed from very early on, primarily inattentive type, but I did have some, as I got older, some actual hyperactivity that came out. But 80% of the time, there's comorbidity with other with other differences. And I'm saying differences rather than disabilities, because I'm very proud of where I am now, and the number of kids that we continue to help on a regular basis. And I've been doing this kind of work. Illuminos, we started in 2016, but it came from the original company that I started in Texas in 2006 called Staying Ahead of the Game. And so for about 15 years, I've been doing this. And, I feel like when you say disability, it makes you think you can't accomplish, something. And so I just think it's, you work differently and you think differently. So I call it learning differences. But so I had other 80% of the time, ADHD has comorbidity with other conditions. And so for me, I have some auditory processing struggles, some reading comprehension struggles, a little bit of mild OCD. So I struggled in school, and I didn't realize how lucky I was until later. I went to really small private schools my whole life. I graduated at the end of 11th grade, actually, in a class of a whopping 11 from a little Jewish private school, actually. And then I went on to college here in the United States, to Rhodes College, and the entire school, it's a college, not a university, so there wasn't a lot of graduate programs. It was about 100 square acre campus, but there's only 1,400 kids. Still to this day, I think there's just over 1,500. So it was small, and my biggest class was, 25 kids. So I had very, very ready access to teachers my whole life, and we were able to limit distractions that way. And I had accommodations through school my entire life, extended time and a few others, here and there, which I'm happy to talk about later if it's interesting. And I struggled in school, but I did better. I performed better than I statistically ever should have. But now I know that it's only because of that perfect alignment of stars that, my father knew exactly what was going on with me from a very young age. He shared with me, my capability. And so IQ tests and those kinds of, he shared a lot of that information with me strategically, I'm convinced, so that I knew that when I struggled with things, I knew that it wasn't because I wasn't smart, and I think that was really helpful for my confidence and growth mindset, et cetera. But I always did well in school, even though I statistically shouldn't have, with all the learning differences or disabilities that I had. But it wasn't without struggles. It wasn't without sleepless nights. It wasn't without, waking up super early in the morning to review. It wasn't, it wasn't without a few really harsh learning experiences where, I tried and really thought I gave something my best and completely forgot that there was a back page to the review sheet. So I didn't study half the material, like that kind of thing. And so I struggled. I mean, I remember taking tests, and teachers felt bad for me, and they would let me, in some cases, rewrite essays, because I would have an essay on my test, the subjective part of my test, where it was worth like 25, 30% of the test was this big, long essay. And I wrote a beautiful essay it was clear that I studied and I worked hard and I understood the material, but I never actually answered the question. And it had to do with how my brain, that was awful, how my brain kind of processed things. So my experience in school was a struggle. And then, college, I finished with degrees in biology and religious studies, because I did have a gap year where I studied in Israel for a year and took some religious classes there, as well as some basic college courses. Yeah, that was fun. I even did some work. I volunteered for the Army and did and for the dog division, and trained some dogs for the Israeli Army. That was fun. But I came back, and I after graduating, I took some post-bac classes in psychology, which was always another love and interest, following in my father's footsteps there. But I discovered industrial and organizational psychology, which is, in Europe, they call it work psychology, which is probably more appropriate. It has to do with the psychology of work performance, of how people perform at work. And I pivoted from that, and then created this academic coaching program out of some of the research that I did on polychronicity, which is a fancy word for multitasking and time management, and executive coaching, which was always interesting to me, how, you know, the C-suite folks, or, you know, kind of top executives, balance and juggle everything and do so effectively. That was always fascinating to me. And I loved it. And I said, you know, kids are little executives.
Yeah.
And they have their home life. Sometimes they have athletics, you know, things like that. They have their after school, that they have friends, social life, but then they have all these classes they're taking at school. Those are like different departments, and they're like a little CEO trying to keep all those balls in the air, juggle everything successfully. And often the hardest part of school, and this is what led me to start the company, the hardest is noticing that the hardest part of school often wasn't the work itself. It was juggling all of the demands, that, you know, all the expectations, and keeping all those balls in the air without them dropping on the floor. And nobody was really addressing, in my opinion, was really targeting or addressing that learning process or those foundational skills, but rather they were just treating the symptoms as they come up. Oh, well, we're struggling in math. Okay, now we're going to get a math tutor. Oh, we're struggling. We didn't turn this in on time. It must be a writing problem.
Another thing that, schools do is sometimes they just stick the child in detention when they haven't handed in the work. That's not really solving the problem behind them not handing in the work. So I love the way you looked at it. Yeah. So I'm going to ask, so if there's a parent listening who maybe has a child who's got learning differences, maybe diagnosed or not yet diagnosed, but they kind of suspect that they tend to, you know, they're quite forgetful, not very organized, time management, all that kind of stuff. What's something quick? Because I honestly think the 4 things you mentioned earlier would help any and every parent. But is there any one specific thing that might help a parent that's got a child with, you know, ADHD or any other learning difference?
I guess if you make me pick one, I would say, you know, communication is really important. And let me tell you why. As a parent, there's an old adage that says mama knows best, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that kids who have a good foundation and have great parents and are trying but struggling with, you know, a learning difference like ADHD, the worst combination for a child is a child who is grounded with wonderful parents, who still has confidence left and is working 2, 3, 4 times harder than everybody else in the class. What they are turning in is comparable to what everybody else in the class is turning in. And so there's no flags going off from the school's perspective, like that the student is struggling. So they're not getting the attention, the extra attention that they need at school, because nobody at school can see their struggles, because the struggles are at home, working 3, 4, 5 times harder to study the same material or to complete the same set of problems. And so while every other student in the class might be spending 30 minutes, an hour, you know, this student is spending 2, 3, 4 hours a night to complete the same work, but they actually complete it and they turn it in, then it's never on a teacher's radar or the school's radar that this student is struggling. Well, over time, having to work that much harder than all of your peers takes a toll on you. Yeah. And it will, you can hide it, but eventually if it goes unaddressed, it will cause bigger problems. And so open communication with your children. If you see them, you know, create an environment where they feel comfortable sharing with you where they're struggling, how they're feeling, what they're noticing at school. Be an active parent where you talk to other parents about how long their kids are spending on this or that, so that oftentimes it's the parent and only the parent who can see these issues brewing before they come to a head and erupt. And so, you know, I have so many answers to your question, but if I have to pick one, I would say I think the most important thing is an open line, a healthy relationship with your kid, and an open line of communication with your kid, and being an active and proactive parent. Yeah. You know, by asking your kid questions nightly before they go to bed. How is school today? How is this? How is that? Talking to other parents. You know, keeping an open line of communication with the teachers. You know, I think I tell a story when I do speaking about when children take their first steps. And that's when it really soaks in that we're the cheerleader in their life. They're kind of hanging on that coffee table and they eye the edge of the couch and they're like, today's the day. And they kind of give you that look, and they try to take those first steps, and they take one step, two steps. And before they get to the edge, they fall down. And you think of your reaction as a parent. You weren't like, you idiot, Joey. If you would have just waited 3 weeks, developmentally, you would have been able to make it to the other side. Of course not, right? Like
Yeah.
we are excited and we pull out the cheerleader pom poms, and we call everybody we know, and we pull out our camera, and we're super encouraging. Come on, Joey, you can do it. You can do it. And that's still our role as the kids get older, even when they become adults. As parents, that's still our role in their life, is to be their biggest cheerleader. And so I think that communication, that open communication, helps us to be that person. And if we're not that person, nobody else is in tune with our kids and their needs and their struggles like we are. So catching these things, learning differently is okay, but we need to notice it quickly so that we can make some accommodations, so that it doesn't interfere with confidence, performance, self-efficacy, et cetera. I think that's the one thing for me.
Yeah, I agree with you, because the parents, we're in such a good position. I'm a teacher and a parent, and I know that with all the work I do with my students, the parents are still the most important. They're the first people to see these things. They should be. And then it makes it easier for everybody else. It doesn't mean that if the parents are not, there's a big problem, but it's really important that the parents keep that line of communication with their children. I've heard you say quite a few times about confidence. And I have this belief that, that's the most important thing to keep going with every child. When we focus on the grades and all the other surface stuff, and we're killing the confidence underneath, it's very difficult to get them to pick themselves back up, try new things, keep going when it's tough, believe in themselves. So confidence is important, and it's really how we communicate with them that would help them feel like, help them feel confident, help them feel that they're worth anything.
Yes, and I would also add that there is a window of opportunity when the kids are young, to really hit this hard, to impact their confidence and foster that growth mindset, and really make sure that they are happy, healthy, self-efficacious, children. And there's this window of opportunity, and you don't know if you did it until later, because it's later, when they get a little bit older, that you see the benefits of all of that, hard work to build their confidence when they were younger. And so I would just encourage parents, if you're not sure if you're doing the right thing, there is no harm or shame in asking. Preventative mental health, preventative medicine, preventative is something that is becoming, increasingly more popular, and I think for good reason. And so parents are in that important seat or chair to have that influence on their kids. And you just don't know if you're doing it right or wrong until it's kind of too late. And so if you're unsure, you have this window of opportunity when they're super young. And if you're unsure, it's worth a few sessions with a counselor or something, just to talk it over and make sure that you have the right approach, and it makes the world of a difference for the rest of your kids' lives.
So true. And listening to you, it sounds to me like, as a child, you keep saying you were lucky, but let's be honest, your parents were intentional about the things how they approached you, how they raised you. It wasn't just luck. I know we'd like to say, but you talk about how much attention. It's good that your dad, for example, being a psychologist, had all this information, but he was very intentional about the things he did with you and put you in particular schools. But, my thing is, what would you say was the one key thing, and you may have mentioned it already, that you feel your parents did that really, basically, the one key thing your parents did that makes you now feel you're so lucky?
I would say I have vivid memories of my mom and dad telling me frequently that they were proud of me. I never that they were proud of me, and taking that moment to say, listen, this made me proud, that made me proud, like, I'm very proud of you for this and that, and just that kind of recognition, it stood out to me. I lost my father in a couple months. It'll be 5 years actually that I lost my dad, and it was unexpected. Too young. He was 66 years old, and I was 33 at the time. And I remember that. I still hear that in my head at 38 years old. I still hear that. And so I would say, if you have a feeling that you are proud of your kid, tell them. And I think that it goes a long way. And even if my kids are sleeping, I walk into their room at night and whisper in their ear that I'm proud of them before I go to bed. And it was because of that, a direct result of that growing up.
That is so,
That's how you do it.
that's so amazing to hear you say. And I love how you link to my next question already, something you learned from childhood that affected you in adulthood, which you now do with your kids. And this is just the beauty, because the pattern repeats itself, especially if we allow it to, whether it's negative or positive. And the good thing I say to parents is the positive patterns will repeat themselves if you're intentional about it. So will but the negative patterns are more likely to repeat themselves when you don't even pay attention to it. So I love, it's been so wonderful listening to you. There's so much more that you can, share with our parents. I just think it's been fascinating. I'll just let you say maybe one thing that parents should avoid. Something that we might be doing unintentionally, but we really need to watch out for, and be intentional about not keeping up with it. I'd like to hear that from you. I've got some ideas, but I'd love to hear your view.
So that's an easy one for me. I think that parents we get upset, right? And that's okay. It's okay to be upset sometimes. But you know how when you go eat at a restaurant, or you have an experience at a hotel or a resort or something, it's a widely known fact that if we're happy, we tend to not say anything. But if we have a bad experience, we tend to be very loud about that. So, and we have this kind of like, no news is good news, kind of mentality. And I think that it's so easy because parents are so busy. I mean, they're juggling. So, kids, it's not, life is not easy for kids, but in some ways it feels like they don't have to deal with car insurance or property taxes, or, like they don't have to deal with some of those real world, real life, disability insurance, life insurance, like, jewelry insurance. Like they don't have to deal with some of these realities of life that kind of hit us hard in the face when we're adults. And so but it doesn't mean that their first person experience is not that being a child is tough. I mean, that is their experience, that there are aspects of being a child that are tough. But as adults, we look back, gosh, life is so easy, and I think that because adults are pulled in so many different directions and have so many responsibilities, it's very easy to only bring up and inadvertently that's very negative, and not say things when things are going well. And I think that it's important that parents force themselves to take time. They don't have to make themselves, if something's not going well, you don't have to make yourself say something. Like that's natural. You will say something. You will, but what's unnatural is forcing yourself. You have to force yourself to say something went well. Hey, I'm really proud of how you behaved at dinner with Mimi and Poppy. I'm really happy, or I'm really proud of you for this. Or, you know what? I know you've gotten straight A's every semester, but you did it again, and that doesn't mean that it's less impressive. Even though you've done it 7 times before, it's still really impressive. And I want you to know I recognize your hard work, and I'm proud of you. And you're putting forth your best effort. That's wonderful. And so I think that I would tell parents, make an effort to go out of your way to acknowledge things that are going well, and not just things that are going not well.
Oh, that's amazing. And I have to say a big thank you to you, Evan. This has been so insightful. I know that our listeners would have learned a lot. There's, even for me listening, it just warmed my heart so much because I think it's so much important stuff that you shared with us. So thank you so much. I will put all your details because I want people to get in touch with you because it's very important. I think academic coaching is crucial. You can support parents, educators, counselors. You can support the actual children as well. And you do it virtually now as well, don't you?
We do it virtually, and listen, just like the tips that I shared with you today, we have a wonderful Instagram account where we're very active, Illuminos_coaching. So at Illuminos_coaching, and we post tips. Illuminos is ILLUMINOS_coaching. And we post tips that are timely, so if it's ahead of midterms or ahead of finals or the start of the school year, there's some really great tips and inspirational quotes and ideas and etc. Facebook, we do a lot of similar things on Facebook if folks prefer that. Our website has some really great information and blogs, which is illuminos.co, co.co. And so I encourage people to visit and read some of the blogs. We have several blogs on the topics, some of the topics that we talked about, today. And so we'd love to keep in touch, and we'll be starting a newsletter soon where we'll be sending out some free tips, once a month to anybody who's interested. And so, yeah, we'd love to hear from folks, love to keep in touch. And, we did pivot a year ago, and while we did some virtual work, we've done a lot more over the last year, and learned that we can do, 90 to 95% of what we do in person effectively virtually. So, and we are working with people not just around the U.S., but a couple around the world. So yes, if we're ever in a position where we can help, or if you even just have a question, please feel free to reach out. And I love doing this, and thank you again for having me. This is so special.
Thank you for listening to Parenting on Purpose podcast today. Remember to subscribe, leave a rating, and share with a parent who cares. You can follow me on Instagram at abiara.william, where I post tips and videos regularly to help you on your parenting journey. Let's do this together for our kids.